Now, Election Day is a week away. Early voting and absentee ballots, states all across the country are surpassing expectations for voter turnout.
Yeah, in Georgia, for example, already at 40% voter turnout. And in Michigan, we're at about 28% as of last night, with more than 1.6 million absentee ballots returned, another 390,000 voting in person.
Here to get a pulse check on the election and where we stand with only a week to go, North Central Michigan College political science professor Scott Latour. Scott, thanks so much for being here with us.
Good morning, Eric. Good morning, Bill.
This is a stressful time for the entire country. Let's just rip that Band-Aid right off.
Especially a political science professor.
Especially a political science professor. I mean, I'd love to, for a moment, to hear kind of how you articulate this election to your students, because I imagine, them being college students for the most part, this may be their first election that they are of age to vote in, so they have nothing to compare it to, whereas those of us who've been voting for decades, this is not a normal election.
Yeah, I mean, for many students in my classes, it's the first election that they're going to participate in, and what I've found that I've done a lot this semester is to, in some way, explain kind of the nuts and bolts of voting. Like, what are your options? What is election day at a polling place like? How do you walk your way through a ballot? And I find that kind of dispelling some of those uncertainties and the newness and novelty of it helps to make them more confident and more likely to turn out and go vote.
So we're a week away now. I know you talked with our political reporter Sheldon earlier this week, but talk to us about just your take on where we stand now a week out, and I guess if this high turnout already through early voting and absentee voting surprises you.
Well, I think we have to be hesitant about early voting numbers. We have nothing to compare it to in Michigan, and so this year is really a nice baseline as to the turnout effects of early voting. It's very possible that many of the people who have turned out to early vote, the 350,000 people who have done that already, might have just voted on election day anyway. And so in that case, it's just one hand washing the other. These are expected voters anyway. I think once all the ballots are counted, it will be very interesting in Michigan to see whether the 9 days of early voting has juiced turnout or whether it just spread the relatively same amount of turnout over a longer period of time. That's a question that I'm very interested to see the answers on after Election Day.
Gotcha. Wow.
There does seem to be just a ton of excitement, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word, or anticipation. Anxiety. I mean, there's all of the adjectives, right?
All the feelings are going on.
Feelings
for the last 10 days
going
of
into this.
Yeah.
I'm also curious about, I mean, we talked about your class there at NCMC too, but are you finding that same excitement among the students? Are you finding a lot of misinformation and confusion? I don't know if classmates get into a debate with each other. I mean, how does this work in the college classroom setting?
Oh, it's really interesting. They're motivated. What I tend to find is they're motivated a little less around candidates and more around issues. They all have issues that they that they care about or that they're motivated by. Sometimes they feel like those issues are addressed by candidates. Oftentimes they're not. We had a very interesting discussion after the Trump-Harris presidential debate way back in October. Remember that? Way back in September, so long ago. But it was really interesting to hear their takes on that and how they expressed frustration that the candidates were not, directly answering questions around issues and instead framing their opponent as being bad for the country. So they're a little disillusioned about candidates, but they do care about issues quite a bit. I think living in a swing state helps motivate them to vote, whereas if you lived in a state that was not going to be that close, I think a lot of them would just take a pass. But I'll be interested to hear about their behavior and their choices after Election Day.
Well, Scott, it seems like I agree with a lot of your students. I mean, I think one of the questions I asked last time we were chatting was, wow, now thinking about it this way, that was back when Joe Biden was still in the running. And we asked the question of why is it that it seems like they're not actually telling anyone what they stand for and instead just telling everyone what their opponent doesn't. And it just, that doesn't address any of the drastic, almost catastrophic concerns of the average American people. Are we going to get any actual policy information out of any of these? I mean, I know it's a week up. No one's going to really try to rock the boat week leading up to the election. But are we going to get an understanding of what, frankly, either candidate actually stands for?
I think there's two ways to think about that. So I think in the one way, if you looked hard enough, you would find candidates espousing a lot of positions, right? Like if you start to think about kind of Trump and what he's been talking about, that he has plans, immigration, and deportation and tariffs, and like he has articulated some kind of plans. So has Harris, if you watch a lot of her ads, right, around a middle class tax cut, support for new home buyers, extended child benefits, right? So like they do mention these policy changes and these beliefs that they have. On the other hand, the current name of the game in American politics is to identify a problem, blame your opponent for it, and say that you will do things better, right? And that goes in line with a lot of academic research that negative polarization, in other words, getting voters not to vote for you specifically, but to vote for you because they fear the other candidate, is in a lot of ways a pretty strong motivator to vote in a country that is divided roughly 45% to 45% with about 10 in the middle. And if you can scare, or if you can frame the election around a problem that your opponent is responsible for, then you are able to shift 5 to 6% of that 10% in the middle over to your side. And you see Trump do it when he talks about, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Inflation, the economy, and immigration is bad, and I blame Harris for it. And you see Harris do it when she talks about abortion and Trump's record on abortion and January 6th and the need for democracy and the future of our system. Both sides do that because in the last 10 days, you're trying to amp up your base, which means be afraid of the other guy, and take at least 4 to 5% of that middle 10% and drive them to you, not necessarily because they love you, because if they did, they would already be on your side, but because they fear the other candidate. And that is kind of the name of the game today in American politics.
Mudslinging, it's always fun.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for being here. I know we're going to have you on again with us next Tuesday on Election Day, and you're going to be here live in our studio on election night, talking with us as those results come in. So we always appreciate your insight. Thanks for giving us your time, Scott.
My pleasure. See you, boys.
Always a pleasure, Scott. Thank you, sir.